It was a pleasure to be here, and I just would love to have an open discussion. I made an awful lot of friends when I stood on my head in the New York State Assembly and on the top of my desk and said, "This is the nation's most dysfunctional legislature." I did that right after reading a book called How to Make Friends and Influence Enemies. That's a joke, you can laugh or not. But the point is this, I mean, if anybody has been more critical of Albany, it was rare. And to think what has been accomplished this session, and in a bipartisan manner from Albany, we've accomplished a great deal. I remember Governor Spitzer speaking about the fact that in his budget that everything would change on day one, but then that budget we went to increase spending and taxes and increase expenditures by the largest point in New York State history at that time. And the comment was made, well, you can't turn a battleship overnight. Well, then you come to this year and you take a look at what was happened with a Democratic governor working with a Republican Senate in the majority. It was a balanced budget. It was on time, and the state Senate was actually early. We cut the budget by 2%. And I know that you guys make the tough decisions every day at the local level. That may not sound like a lot. In the land of Albany, a cut of 2% when you're typically increasing by 8 to 10% is humongous. It's enormous, and it represents a real sea change in the attitude in Albany. Not only that, government expenditures overall for the state government operations were cut. The target was 10%. I've been appointed to the governor's Spending and Government Efficiency Commission, the SAGE Commission. Our task is to get the state agencies and authorities in line, 20% cut there. Not only that, there was no backdoor borrowing. There were no gimmicks, as you've seen in previous sessions, and there were no new taxes. So we'll go to this, and I guess we're doing this for the camera, okay. The balance, we can take this one down. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about the property tax cap. I know that there may be some questions on the property tax cap. If there are any specific questions that you have that I can't answer, we'll get that information right back to you. And I know that there are some concerns with this property tax cap, but from a perspective of all of our constituents, we've seen double-digit tax increases, or 8, 9, 10%, specifically on the school taxes throughout Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess County, the districts I represent, but beyond. I mean, the school tax crisis used to be a crisis of Westchester County, of parts of Long Island, but it's really become a crisis throughout the entire state of New York. And we simply cannot keep up with that. Now, many of the school districts have kept within that 2% cap this year. But the reason why it's so important to have a property tax cap is not this year or next year as we still have a staggering economy. It's really looking out 10 years down the road as things begin to pick back up, that we don't see those double-digit increases compounded. Are there problems with the tax cap that are going to be pointed out? Absolutely. And I'm here to take your input and make sure that we make those changes. The 2% cap has certain safety valves in it, whether it become to retirement costs or allowing a 60% override, taking into account population increases for school districts. But if you feel that there are other safety valves that should be in there, please let us know. Now, the legislature moved forward from an unfunded mandate perspective, and we put forward a proposal that you would actually be able to bond your pension spikes over time, because over the next 2 years we're looking at pretty extraordinary spikes in pension costs, and then it's going to level out. We wanted to see municipalities and school districts be able to bond that out. Unfortunately, the governor did veto that. But if you want to see more protections placed in the tax cap, we actually have 2 advisory councils that we're looking to merge. One is an unfunded mandate advisory council, and the other one is specifically on tax relief. We're probably going to merge those together. We're asking all the town supervisors throughout the 40th Senate District, which goes from the Massachusetts border down to Pound Ridge, to be involved in that. But I also would like town board members and any elected officials or otherwise interested parties to take advantage of those advisory councils. We'll go to the next one. On mandate relief, we haven't even started. There's about $127 million in unfunded mandate relief that came down this year. Is that chump change? Yes, but a couple things on this. First, I just want you to know that in the Senate we were fighting for over $280 million in unfunded mandate relief. I think the Assembly came back with about $10 or $20 in unfunded mandate relief that they would like to see. Once again, that's a joke, but you don't have to laugh. They may have been at 80 million to 100 million. So we got 127 million in this budget. The property tax cap is forcing the issue of unfunded mandate relief. And we have to understand that. There are going to be some structural tough times and structural realities that we're going to see probably over the next 6 months or the next year. But the reality is that the tax cap is going to frame the argument locally. So legislators from both sides of the aisle are now going to be forced to go back to Albany saying, look, you passed a tax cap, but we don't have unfunded mandate relief. And that's going to force the issue on some very serious issues. Now, some people talk about things, the big ones, right? Triborough, WICS, special education is one that come up. And I got to tell you, I mean, there are certain people that say, look, we've got to get rid of the requirements on special education. I say, well, if you feel that, and in some instances, those are unfunded mandates. I say, well, would you like us to go back to the federal standards? Because New York State has really moved the ball on special education in a lot of really good ways. So are you suggesting that we do what Alabama does? Just follow the federal guidelines. And they say, well, I don't exactly mean that. So I think we have to have a very honest discussion about some of these unfunded mandates. And to the extent that we have a list of over 250 that we've compiled working with legislators, working with town boards, many of these are small dollars. We're talking about $2 million, $10 million, $30 million, small dollars in a state budget that's over 130 billion, but it adds up when you add them together. So I ask that each of you take a look at our list and help us add to those. And then just also understand that those top 9 that account for a large percentage of the unfunded mandate costs, there's some real political realities with dealing with those, and we have to be honest about it. So moving forward, let's get done what we can get done, but realize that some of these are extremely politically sensitive and for good reason. And special education is a very good example of that. Next. We already did balanced budget, didn't we? Yeah, we did that one. What's next? MTA tax. The MTA tax, and I'm breezing through these because I know you're busy and I thank you for your time. We passed a phased MTA tax repeal in the Senate this year. It's my belief in conversations with the governor and the Senate majority and majority members in the Assembly that we will get an MTA tax repeal next year, okay? What you have to understand about this, and I don't know how many of you know, but Walter has resigned. I've clashed with the MTA. I'm the one who started the charge for forensic accounting. Forensic meaning criminal accounting of the MTA's budget from the very beginning. But I got to tell you, Walter really did begin to initiate progress. There were 3,000 positions that Walter, a little over 3,000 that Walter cut. If you really look into those cuts, it's about 1,000. Because some of them vacancies just weren't filled and otherwise. And there were some cuts across the board. But we're talking about an authority that has corruption, real corruption, and project overruns 200%, 300%, 400%. Even their construction of their headquarters down at 2 Broadway was rife with mob infiltration. It was widely reported in the press. So this is an organization that needs to be forensically audited, and as the new MTA head comes in, Walter's progress needs to be completed. We can't consider it to be a home run in any way because there's a lot more that needs to be done. Walter was not very popular with some of the rank and file members because of some of the tough decisions he made, but that was necessary. On a phased repeal, the MTA's budget, I don't know the exact number, it's $11, $12 billion, but it's north of $10 billion. And that MTA payroll tax represents over $1 billion. $1 billion as a revenue stream to this authority. This is the problem with initiating new taxes. Because once you initiate new taxes, then those revenue streams, the organizations of which, or the governments which rely upon them, become reliant on those revenue streams. So it's not only about repealing the MTA payroll tax now it's about finding a way to fill $1.5 billion hole. That's a real problem from a political perspective. We have initiated a phased repeal. I can get you the specifics on it, but it breaks out small businesses, larger businesses. It brings in municipalities and school districts over time, and it will save, I think the number is north of $850 million in the first few years with more savings moving forward. That's the right way politically to be able to get this done. We passed it in the Senate. I believe that the governor, and speaking to him, that he's going to make it a priority. Next year, there are 3 priorities the governor had. Property tax cap, we passed it in the Republican Senate and got it done for that Democratic governor as his first program bill. ethics reform, which we got done, many of the libel reforms that I initiated, including making sure that public officials, it's amazing it took this long to get this done, but public officials convicted of a felony would not get their pensions. And a whole host of new disclosures. Remember, the big deal is that many of these elected officials can hide behind huge loopholes in the ethics law. We closed many of those loopholes. That was passed, that was done. And lastly, gay marriage. And just quickly on gay marriage, when the other house was in control, it didn't pass. No matter where you stand on that issue, democracy happened. The reality is that we brought it to a floor. There were many in my conference who didn't want it to come to a vote. Who may not, there were a few who didn't want it to come to a vote. There were many who were going to vote no, but believe that democracy should happen. And on our watch, in a conference that could have bottled it up, it was brought to the floor, it was brought to a vote, democracy happened, no matter whether you're happy or not. And that dysfunctional Albany, at that moment, was a thriving democracy. So that issue is what that is. And it'd be nice to focus on jobs and taxes now, because one of the things I feel that we haven't done very good this year is focus on job creation. And we've passed bills in the Senate, but that's not good enough. We need the leadership there. So I do think that you're going to see a phased repeal of the MTA payroll tax next year, which this is a huge job killer in the Hudson Valley and all of our districts. What's next? Reforming Albany, we talked a little bit about the ethics reform package. This ethics reform package that passed, closing the loopholes, increasing the disclosure, making sure that public officials convicted of a felony don't receive their pensions. Much of this would have been absolutely impossible even a year ago, 2 years ago, and certainly before that. And I've got to say that genuinely, that working relationship, how the governor has been able to get Shelley Silver into a corner, I don't know. Maybe he has photos of him from high school, something like that, I don't know. But the reality is that Shelley Silver has been more cooperative than I have, and I haven't been there for a long time, but I have ever seen him be. Dean Skelos and the governor, my majority leader, they have a very good working relationship based on mutual respect. But the third element has always been Shelley Silver has always been able to wait out any governor, and basically anyone, being the Darth Vader of Albany, but it's getting done. Next. Homeland Security, I'm the chairman of Veterans Affairs, Homeland Security, Military, and Naval Affairs. We held a hearing in the city, you may have heard about it. I got a bunch of beautiful packages to my office, hearts and candy and flowers and stuff like that, a couple death threats. But as chairman of Homeland Security, look, going into this hearing, I'll give you one example. We went with whistleblowers. We went under the Port Authority bus terminal. We drove under the Port Authority bus terminal. It's the busiest bus terminal in the United States of America, one of the busiest in the United States of America, in the world. There were guard shacks that were constructed after 9/11 that were absolutely empty. We drove in and out. You could have drove 12, 20 buses packed full of explosives like we just saw happen just 2 days ago across the pond, and could have blown the place up. And those guard shacks were a horrible reminder that in the days after 9/11, many people have forgot that New York City and its suburbs are terrorist target number one. Because if you look at where we have seen hits happen in Europe, they use those areas in the suburbs, and then they use the public transportation as delivery vehicles for terror. We went over to JFK Air Train, where, and by the way, now that those guard shacks are full, they're being manned. It took Eyewitness News and myself to expose that. And why do we do it? Because it's, the shacks have been empty for so long. And there's a point where you got to embarrass the Port Authority to do the right thing, but they did do the right thing after that. JFK Air Train, that air train actually goes under LL Terminal. No manning whatsoever. In the days after 9/11, there was security. Now they say 99% of the time it was not manned whatsoever. Today, it's being manned. The congressional Republicans down in Washington, D.C., walking into a room with an axe and a chainsaw instead of a scalpel, decided to cut hundreds of millions of dollars of funding from Homeland Security, actually over $1 billion in funding from Homeland Security. $187 million to New York City alone would have been absolutely devastating. I worked with the governor, with Mayor Bloomberg, and within a few short days, that funding was restored. And Peter King, who is an absolutely enormous asset to New York State, and we are lucky and safer for having Peter King as chair of that committee. We're going to be doing a follow-up hearing on Homeland Security nearly 10 years after 9/11. We're not secure where we need to be. Anybody that's been to Manhattan, you know Lower Manhattan is a steel fortress. It truly is. It's secure. When you go north or you go to our transportation corridors, whether it be the George Washington Bridge or the tunnels, unfortunately we're wide open. And it's a problem, and it needs to be addressed. And when you're looking at the Federal Department of Homeland Security, the reality is that we have spent tens of billions of dollars in places and in states and cities at much less security risk than New York City. So we cannot protect every strip mall in the United States of America, and if we try, we will fail miserably. But if we do not protect our soft underbelly, which is places in New York City and Washington, D.C., or ports or airports, we're going to be in real trouble. And if you remember, President Bush kind of dragged his feet on creating a Federal Department of Homeland Security. I don't know why, but I think this is why. Because the Federal Department of Homeland Security has become a cash purveyor for pork all across the country, not based on necessarily on needs, but instead on spreading the pork. And that's a problem that really needs to be addressed. On veterans issues, one thing that I don't want to forget, we're going to do a Hudson Valley Hall of Honor that we ask every town board in our district to please nominate a veteran for this honor, and then they will be nominated for the statewide award that we do in the Senate, and that's totally up to you who you want to nominate. We have accomplished a great deal on veterans issues this year, but specifically on constituent services, I just want you to know, when we have a veteran who needs help, we move heaven and earth to take care of that vet. So if you have a vet in the community, a returning vet, World War II vet, anywhere in between, please let me know. One big initiative we're working on right now is a state veterans cemetery. New York State is one of less than, I think, 20 states that does not take part in the state veterans cemetery program. Once you get outside that 75-mile radius, you're much less likely, unfortunately, to visit a grave site. The only two that we have, and they're not state veteran cemeteries, but one's in Long Island, and we have one national in Saratoga. And outside of that, we do not have them. There's a very generous federal program that basically pays for everything, reimburses the state cost, pays for each and every burial, and the goal is to provide to the underserved veteran population. In our area, we have 99,000 underserved veterans, so we would be at the top of the list, and we're pushing to get that through. We also passed a military protest bill. If you know about the, I think it's called, what's Baptist Church? It's Westboro, where they actually go to the funerals of active duty military personnel, and they protest them with all sorts of horrific stuff. And we wanted to get out in front of that. So there are two bills that came through my committee to limit the ability of those protesters to protest those funerals. Those passed, they were signed by the governor, and they're now in effect. Locally or countywide, you can do the same type of thing. There was a Supreme Court decision that made it a little tough, but these both, in my opinion, passed constitutional muster. What else? That's good. Just quick, I mean, Montrose, funding for Montrose, they were cutting over $10 million in funding to all of our veterans hospitals. And I fought in the Senate, literally until the last day before the budget was passed. Montrose was still on the chopping block. We were able to get the hospital in Long Island reinstated pretty quickly because it was under an educational line item. The other four were not protected. Last minute, we got full funding. It was over $8 million. It meant over $1 million from Montrose alone. That was on the chopping block until the very last day. Okay, good. And we got, my office, myself, we got $500,000 in the budget for that veteran cemetery this year. A few things here, and you know, there is limited money out there. You're going to see on here that we secured $50,000 for my sister's place. There is grant money out there. There's money that has not been used. It can be reappropriated. So to the extent that we can be helpful, please let me know. One of the other issues that came up, it's a women's issue, it's also a veterans issue. There are custody issues with women who are activated and serve, actually losing custody of their children as a byproduct of them serving their nation. We've introduced legislation on this front, and we believe that we're going to have a companion bill at the federal level. Animals, dear to my heart. We had our first Animal Advocacy Day. My favorite wild and furry assemblyman, Jim Tedesco, led it up in the assembly. Amy Paulin has been very active. I've been working with her on puppy mill issues and a bunch of other dogfighting bills. We passed a dogfighting bill to make it a crime to watch it. I have a puppy mill bill that I'm working on right now called Charlemagne's Law that I believe it'll pass in the next session.